So this happened literally 30 minutes ago. I'm driving to work and it's about 3:30 a.m. I take 3 different routes to work, but I've been taking the same one for a while since there's construction everywhere else. I'm driving down this road and on either side of the road are all subdivisions. I'm listening to a podcast, trying to keep myself awake until I can get some coffee. I start getting this uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I thought it was my body telling me to get some caffeine and maybe something to eat. I ignored it and continued driving. All of a sudden, this guy starts running out in the middle of the road. I barely see him since he's wearing dark clothes. I manage to slow down and I notice he looks pretty freaked out. Now, I listen to a lot of creepy podcasts ranging from true crime to supernatural. I know the rules to stay safe in situations. I wish I would have listened to them today. I normally wouldn't stop, but I knew that if something happened to me, I would want someone to stop. So I did. Luckily, I kept my car running and I rolled down my window a little bit, just so I could talk to the guy. I asked him if he was okay and he started freaking out, saying someone was trying to kill him. He told me his dog was ripped apart in his front lawn and he tried to pick the remains up to try and bury it, but he saw a man running after him with a knife. He said he thought it was probably a coyote or something, so he wasn't suspicious, but he ran off when he saw this man. Now I was pretty freaked out, but I noticed something. Yeah, it was dark, but with the lights on inside my car and the lights that were on out front of the subdivisions, I could see pretty well. He was younger, about mid-30s, dark black hair and green eyes. He was wearing a hunter's jacket and jeans. What I noticed, however, there was no blood or fur anywhere on him. I asked him why there wasn't any blood on him and his whole demeanor changed. It was like turning off the switch. My blood went cold. He stared at me for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a couple of seconds. What came out of his mouth next was the final straw for me. His whole body relaxed. He stopped shaking and he leaned closer towards my window and smiled at me. It was a twisted type of smile and his eyes went dark. He took a deep breath and said, "I was going to help you." He then started cackling and tried to open my car door and immediately rolled up the window, put my car in drive and sped off down the road, not stopping for anything. Once I finally got to work, I started crying. I still have 10 minutes before I have to go in, and honestly, I'm terrified to get out of my car. In December of 2015, I was making a north-south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my young 20s, driving home for the semester break. I was driving south through Kentucky on I-65 around 11:30 p.m., still about an hour away from the city where I was going to stop for the night. There were no other cars on the road at all, and I had not seen any for a while. That part of I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes for each direction, in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park, and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing, clicked off the phone, and waited for the truck to pass. The truck got right even with my car, and instead of completing the pass, matched my speed and stayed beside me. Then the driver turned on a spotlight on the side of the truck, which shone directly down into the cabin of my car and on my face. I was really confused, as I had never seen a truck do anything like this before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed like a very long minute, and I was getting creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead. I slowed my speed so that the truck would finish passing me. The driver turned off the light and completed the pass, moving from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was very creeped out by this, slowed down some more, and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and this big rig. As soon as I moved in the leftmost lane, the truck matched my speed again and moved over to the middle lane to come parallel to my car. The driver turned on a light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I had now confirmed that this truck driver was definitely following me and definitely being super creepy. I kept my gaze straight ahead, because I felt like looking over would somehow make it worse. The truck turned off the spotlight and pulled in front of my car in the leftmost lane. I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up. I was probably going right around the speed limit again, maybe 70 to 75 miles per hour. By the time I completed my merge, I saw the truck beginning to shift lanes towards me again and speeding up to match me. Before they could pull up next to me again, I decided it was time to get out of there, and I floored it. I sped up to 90 miles per hour, the fastest I'd ever driven in my life, and I put maybe a mile of distance between me and the truck before slowing down some. I looked up to the rear view mirror, and I will never forget the image. This big orange tractor trailer illuminated by the street lamps of a highway interchange, absolutely devouring the distance I had put between us. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed. I sped up again, but it didn't matter. The truck caught up to me, pulled beside me, and turned on the spotlight again. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed, not daring to look over. It was at this time that I decided my only advantage was the maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind their truck. They moved over into the right lane, and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind the truck in its blind spot so that they could not see me. I saw a sign for an exit and decided this is how I would escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we came up on the exit. I waited until that last possible moment. Once the truck body was beyond the point where the exit split away, I darted out from behind the truck into the exit. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far away from the interstate I should go, and if the truck would come looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right beside the interstate. I parked and got out. I inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage, thinking maybe the driver was trying to warn me of something wrong with my car. There was nothing wrong with it. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was long gone before getting back on the interstate and continuing to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I didn't use I-65. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good will come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this were boring because you did them so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand the feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink, a cigarillo, and I would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and was always just the right amount of spooky. Well, one night I absolutely got more than I was to bargain for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. So if I was to guess, it had been around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and I was completely worry-free. I had music blaring and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through woods or anything crazy like that. It is a normal paved road, but there is really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out, further and further to becoming no houses, and just road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously, at around 3 a.m. in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal little loop around the park. The night before, it stormed very badly. So badly, I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park. That must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere, besides the front of my car, because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous, and there was no way. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me just a little, and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back up off the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me, but said they will pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small four-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in that situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization, so I realized that I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to get to me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been 40 deer in this field, just walking around eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So if I was to guess, they were about 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 eye reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall, but I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way and about an hour and a half out from my location. Still to this day, I remember hearing that and having the thought, "You've got to be fucking kidding me." I understood that me and only me was the reason I was in the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and take a nap to pass the time. So that's what I did. So I wake up about 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before. I don't know how common it is. But there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head, telling me that I needed to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in, and the surrounding I was in, is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. I was very scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided to not mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want them to worry more, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling I had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way, other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a dick. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100 plus, and on top of all of that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation, but worried. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were all still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over in the field. I know they were looking into the woods by them, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds, the field was completely empty. I was petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing to do, but it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack you. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun with him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, They're more scared of you than you are of them bullshit. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck. Then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field, waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there onto the main road again. I got into my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel, completely shook up. As we are driving away, I looked in my rear view mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot I was stuck in, partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rear view mirror a man come out of the tree line behind where my car was and walk into the middle of the road and watch us drive away. My heart stopped beating, legitimately. I lost my breath and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in that moment. I couldn't see any sort of details like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot, knowing he was right there the whole time watching me as I was freaking out looking around, watching me as I was completely alone for a long time, maybe even coming right up to my window and watch me as I slept. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All of these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off,